I bought myself some wigs and learned how to do some like rudimentary stage makeup. And the next few times I went in disguise, I would make eye contact with the chef and he like had no idea who I was.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Priya Krishna is a reporter and video host for The New York Times, where she's currently acting as the co-interim restaurant critic. She's the host of the best-selling cookbooks Indianish and Priya's Kitchen Adventures, a cookbook for kids, and the host of the YouTube series On the Job. We're all admirers of Priya's work here at Taste, and it's so special to have her back onto the show to talk about stepping into the role as restaurant critic, her latest cookbook, and more. Priya Krishna, this is Taste. Thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Third time's a charm, right?
Yeah, I was about to say, this is like, I think you are the first person to have been on the podcast 3 times, and you've been charming every time. But
I got to get off this podcast.
I know, you've been locked in the offices this whole time. We come back around, give you some food, and ask if you want to record. But it's fun because this is my first time getting to speak with you on the podcast, and I have been such a fan of your writing as a former coworker of yours, as just someone on the internet, and I feel like it's really special to get to talk to you about it all today.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, right now you're at an interesting point in your career at the Times. You do video, you've been reporting, you are stepping in as one of the interim restaurant editors, and I want to talk about all of it. But I guess to start, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, like, do you see a core intersection of food and culture that you're working in? Like, how do you kind of describe the stories that you like to tell?
I like to tell food stories that like look in the corners of the food world where others are not looking. Like I try to find food angles where others may not see one, explore phenomenons that, you know, people working in New York media may not have noticed. For example, I noticed that in Texas, there was this cookie that was taking the state by storm, and they were called crumble cookies. And they had just opened one in New York, and I went, and the line was out the door at Crumble, and there was no line at Levain down the street, the original Levain. And I was like, holy cow, Crumble is like out cookieing Levain on its home turf. And so I basically found out this is like $1 billion cookie business started in Salt Lake City. And I just love stories like that. You know, I feel like oftentimes in New York, like we can get stuck in our like coastal bubble. And I love stories that like break us out of it, or that find food in non-food places.
Yeah, I think that is a big through line in your work, and I like that. And part of it might be that, you know, you have family in Texas, you get to go there and see them. But how are you kind of putting yourself outside of the city that you do live in for most of the time?
Like I read all of the local New York media, but I read a lot of local newspapers. I read I read every single Texas newspaper. I'm on but I also read like newspapers in the Midwest, newspapers in the mountain region. I have a large Indian family who lives all across the country, so I have the privilege of getting to travel to see them. And I don't know. I feel like you just gotta get out of the New York bubble, because like, you know, I think I write stories that are specific to New York, of course, but I feel like the stories that are the most exciting to me are usually the ones that take place outside of the city.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like also maybe another element is you are this person in your life that now all of your friends and family can text and say, hey, I just saw something kind of interesting going on. Maybe you should look into it.
And like, that is huge. You know, I feel like my best story ideas have actually come from like random aunties and uncles living in the Midwest, living in Denver, living in Minneapolis. Like they see something, they text me, they have an idea for a story angle that may not be quite right, but there's like a seed of something amazing in what they're talking about. And that has led me to so many good stories.
Yeah, the Auntie Reporting Network is an underrated resource.
It's huge. It's huge. I like discovered this. I profiled these guys who had started a Hawaiian restaurant in Salt Lake City and they didn't realize that that basically Salt Lake City was filled with these Mormons, many of whom had done their mission trips in Hawaii and were really like homesick for Hawaiian food. And so they just like hit it big with Mormons in Salt Lake City, and then they themselves became Mormons. And I'm like, my dad gave me that story idea.
Wow. Shout out to your dad and also the Mormons who played the long game with those guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, first we're gonna help you set up a restaurant empire, and then you're gonna see the light. So I want to talk to you about your video series On the Job that you do for the Times, where you follow these vital and often unseen food industry workers, cafeteria workers, bodega guys, dishwashers, the barista in Times Square, I believe, right? Grand Central, even more stressful. And I feel like you just get to have all these really interesting experiences. I'm curious what some of your most memorable times shadowing people on the job have been.
I mean, like every single character person sort of brings their own every single person on that show kind of inspires me in a different way. I learn something different from each one. I remember I walked away from the cafeteria episode, which centered a cafeteria cook, Ruth, learning about just like this quiet confidence she had. She wasn't like constantly yapping at her workers. She wasn't, yelling out rules or giving instructions, but like they really clearly respected her. And she had just like built this like quiet brigade for herself in this middle school cafeteria in Queens. I was so impressed by the dishwasher at Gage and Tollner, Dre, who just like his ambition and his desire to just like constantly improve his circumstances was just incredibly inspiring. Like when I talked to him like 6 months before, he was a Subway performer, and now he was working at a dishwasher at like one of the more like venerated fine dining institutions in New York, and his goal was to run his own restaurant one day, and I have no doubt that he'll be able to do that. And I guess like the thing that I always think about when I film On the Job is like I feel like I am so driven and I'm constantly thinking, what's next? What's after this? Like I climb a mountain, what comes after that? And I always ask the question of like, what do you want to do next? And every single time without fail, like very often they're just like, I have a really good job and I'm really happy and I can take care of my family. Like I'm not obsessed with what's next. Like they all have just like this deep gratitude that is just so inspiring. And I don't know, like I feel like I can just be like a little bit of a brat, not in the Charlie XCX sense, but just like a bratty person about like I have to move forward. I have to, I have to see what's next. And like I get these reminders monthly to just like stop, look around and like be appreciative.
Definitely. I'm really curious how you go about filming with people in the first place, because I mean, clearly you're so charming and fun to talk to, but you're bringing in like a New York Times camera crew. You're in their workspace the whole day. I'm sure you guys are getting in the way a little bit. How do you kind of build the trust with your sources from the beginning?
It starts with our team. We have a really amazing team headed by two women, Cece Allen and Gina Hernandez. And they, along with our producers, Mantai Chow, Will Timon, Amanda Choi, do just a phenomenal job of trust building before a camera even turns on. So we decide which episodes we want to do, and then we identify like 3 heroes, like 3 protagonists basically. And we spend a lot of time talking to them, and then we narrow it down to 1. And once we choose that person, there's basically like a month-long process in which the head producer is just spending time with that person, talking to them, getting to know them, following them along their day, and just like making them very comfortable. And it is always very remarkable that by the time I show up on set and the cameras are rolling, like they don't really notice the cameras. Also, our production team does an amazing job of just kind of making themselves as small and invisible as possible. So it's not like there's this huge camera in someone's face. So like I wish of course, like I have to be personable, but most of that work is done by our amazing production team, and they put in so much effort to do that. I'm always amazed when I walk onto set and they're like already best friends with not only the subject, but like their entire family.
Yeah, definitely. So you're saying like for the dishwasher episode, there were 3 different dishwashers at 3 different restaurants in consideration, and then it was kind of narrowed down. Or maybe there were a couple dishwashers and you knew Gage and Tollner was going to be the location.
I think there were a few dishwashers at Gage and Tollner that we were talking to, and I think all of them ended up getting featured in some way because like the dynamic in the dish pit was so fun to watch.
Yeah. Can I ask you about the kind of aftermath of that video specifically? I feel like there was an interesting discourse that ended up happening online about the main dishwasher saying that he didn't have access to family meal, and then like a big kind of, I don't know the right word for it, kerfuffle in the comment section.
I mean, I think what we showed in the video was true, which is that he did have access to family meal just like everyone else, but he was just so in the weeds in the dishes that he just like didn't feel like he could take family meal. And I think like as reporters at the Times, all we can do is just like turn the cameras on and then like present what we see. You know, it's not like the restaurant intentionally withheld family meal from this person, but we just saw what it's like to be at the bottom of the hierarchy, which is that like you're doing the dishes of the rest of the staff in addition to the guests, and you don't always feel like you can duck out and have time for a meal.
Yeah. Do you feel like there are any other moments you've captured in the video series that have been surprising to the general public when they get to see the reality of what this job is like?
There was a moment in the bagel roller episode where he basically, the Celestino, the subject, basically said he like didn't take breaks and didn't take vacation because he just like couldn't afford to, like just because there was so much work to do. And I think it sort of goes to show you that like, yes, in theory, you like look on paper like this person is allotted a 30-minute break every day, but then you look at the reality of their work and it's like, does the amount of work that they have to do in a day even allow them to take that break, even though it is like legally their right to do so? And I think those kinds of moments I think are so important because it just like shows you that like the law is one thing, but how the law plays out in practice is quite another.
Yeah, the gap between like reality and the way that people expect things to be or would like things to be. What you say about vacation is interesting to me. It reminds me, I don't know if you heard about this, but there's a couple that does a skewer stand on the street on Canal Street, and they're there every day. And I have a ton of friends that love to go and see them. And a couple weeks ago, they were gone and nobody knew where they were. I had a couple group chats my friends were in where they were trying to figure out where they were. And then one day they were back and my friend Diane walked up to them and started chatting with them, and everything was fine. They had just decided to go on vacation for a week to visit their family, and they had just gone and done that. But nobody knew that that's what they were doing, and people see a street vendor that's not on the street anymore, and they just assume that something bad had happened. But it was, in this case, actually a good thing is that they just got to take a little summer break. So right now you're the interim restaurant critic at the Times with Melissa Clark. You've done so much writing over your career. How do you feel about like criticism specifically as a genre? How are you approaching it?
It's really stressful, honestly. My first review came out yesterday, and I was kind of like shitting my pants and losing sleep over it for weeks. When you're writing a review, you really can't hide behind other people's quotes. You can't hide behind reporting as much. I've always approached reporting as like, I don't want to center myself. I want to center the subjects. And when you're writing a review, in a way, you are centering yourself and centering your perspective. And that's scary to me. Like really, really scary to me. Because I'm also just like, what do I know? You know, of course, I've eaten at a lot of restaurants, but I'm like, I don't know everything about everything. So all I can do is approach this job with just like a deep sense of curiosity and a desire to learn. That's what I'm trying to do. I wonder if in this world of restaurant TikTok and, you know, social media, like how criticism needs to evolve, but that's something I am thinking about. And I don't yet know what that looks like, but I do think criticism needs to evolve.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about your first review? What's the restaurant? How did you approach the reporting process? And is it the same way that Pete Wells was kind of handling in terms of the amount of times you go to a restaurant, how you approach the menu?
Like more or less, yes. It was a Indian restaurant in the East Village called Bungalow. And I think the first time I realized that like there was like this crazy hype around bungalows when my parents came into town from Texas and they had heard of this restaurant. Like my parents never hear about restaurants in New York living in Texas, but they had heard of this restaurant because the chef behind it, Vikas Khanna, is just this like wildly famous chef in India. And my parents had just heard, through the Auntie network that this is like the big opening and it's really good. And so I went with them and like I'm sure you know this experience when you get like spotted and suddenly like the treatment just there's like a vibe shift and like everything changes. And the chef started bringing out dishes himself. He brought out like a sample of lemon pickle for my mom to try. And I literally, all I could think of was like, how can you evaluate a restaurant when you're getting treated like this? Like, and so I started thinking about Ruth Reichel, who would wear wigs and disguises and wrote about it in her amazing book, Garlic and Sapphires. And so I bought myself some wigs and learned how to do some like rudimentary stage makeup. And the next few times I went in disguise and I was not recognized. And it was really, really interesting. Like I would make eye contact with the chef and he like had no idea who I was.
I love this. Because I feel like there's been a pendulum swing away from disguising yourself as a critic in some ways. I know like in Pete Wells's final articles, he was talking about how by the end he was being recognized. Obviously, you and Melissa Clark, who's the other interim restaurant writer, are video personalities and people know you. And our former coworker at BA, Mackenzie Chung-Fagan, who's the critic at The Chronicle, has written about how she was not trying to disguise herself. And I feel like that makes sense because social media, like especially of our generation, it's just hard for no one to know what you're like. But I do appreciate the idea that like in the moment on the restaurant floor, everyone's just trying to get their job done. And if they don't immediately clock you, like you're just someone eating in the restaurant maybe.
And I don't think people appreciate how different it is when you're recognized versus not. Like it can feel like night and day service sometimes. I have like experienced places where like, yeah, the service was amazing because they clocked me. And then like a friend goes and we're like, we were totally ignored. And I'm like hypersensitive to this because when I started in the food industry, I was primarily going out to eat with women of color, and we were often like ignored, told to wait in the rain, forgotten about. And so it sucks feeling like the person ignored in the dining room. And I don't want to ever be reviewing from the perspective of like the like person getting the most privileged service in the dining room, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does make a lot of sense. Do you also feel like when you put on the wig or the disguise that you're kind of like going into critic mode as opposed to when you're just eating in a restaurant in a more casual context?
It's more like I'm uncomfortable and constantly adjusting my wig cap and trying to convince the person across from me not to laugh.
Yeah, I feel like that must be an interesting challenge for the situation.
A quick anecdote, which is that when I went to Bungalow the third time in the wig, one of my aunties just happened to be in town from Texas, and she was sitting on the sidewalk waiting to get in. And I like approached her and she like waved her arms and was kind of like stranger dangering me. And I was like, Shalini auntie, it's me.
Oh my God.
And she like looked like she was about to have like a miniature heart attack.
If you were in like an early 2010s food journalist rom-com, this would definitely be a scene in the rom-com, except for she would come in and be looking around the restaurant and you would be like hoping that she didn't recognize you and like Priya like run across the restaurant and blow the cover.
Yeah.
So are you the person who decides all of the restaurants that you're going to be reviewing? How do you handle that part of the process?
I've been making those decisions. Obviously, the editors on the desk definitely weigh in. They have restaurants that they definitely want us to review. But for me, I'm looking at like a variety of styles, price points, cuisines, neighborhoods. I don't just want to be reviewing fine dining restaurants. Also because I'm just inherently not not as interested in fine dining restaurants as I am other kinds of restaurants.
Yeah, it's a certain way of eating for sure. I wouldn't say it's something I especially gravitate towards, but it is what the majority of criticism of a certain style has been writing about for a long time. So it's always interesting to see how that gets kind of mixed up or dealt with differently as time goes on. Is that kind of what you mean about how you think criticism needs to evolve now that TikTok and so many other platforms have criticism as a part of it?
I mean, I think Pete did a really amazing job reviewing different kinds of restaurants, not just reviewing fine dining restaurants. I think he did actually did a really remarkably good job covering the city. He was going out to Staten Island, deep in the Bronx. Like, he found some amazing places. I guess what I more mean is a 1,000 word review the best format? Like, should criticism be more multimedia? For this review, I also filmed like an accompanying explainer that's going to go on our TikTok and talk about my process, how many times I went, how many dishes I ate, what was the most expensive, what was the least expensive, and, just like a little bit of insight into what my experiences were like that you couldn't get in the review. And I think that stuff is interesting, like treating it like there's going to be a social component, a video component, and like a written component of some sorts. I think that's really interesting to me. We also have this amazing newsletter called Where to Eat that's very servicey. I love reading beautiful words around food. I think there needs to be more service, honestly, which is the thing I can't believe I'm saying in the year 2024. But I I think it needs to be more. I think criticism needs to offer more service.
Well, I'm interested to see how that all plays out. And I want to talk to you about your latest book while you're here in the studio also, Priya's Kitchen Adventures, which is, I would say, like kind of a cookbook for kids, but also people of all ages. Is that how you bill it to people?
Yeah, I guess like adults who don't love to chop would love this book.
Yeah, that would be a great tagline for the book, actually. A cookbook for kids and adults who don't like to chop.
Yeah.
And over the past year, you were kind of going on book tour and going all over the country. And I feel like a really cool element of that book tour that maybe is different than previous projects you've worked on is the amount of kids and young readers that were in the room. What kinds of conversations and activities did you get to do through this book tour?
Oh my God, it was like the best. It was the best book tour ever. Kids are the most fun guests. I did a chaat making workshop in LA. And of course, like every LA kid, I was like, does anyone know what tamarind chutney is? And they're like, yeah, we have some in our pantry right now. There was one really amazing one where I taught the kids how to write a recipe. And then all the kids wrote a recipe for their favorite food. And then they all read them. It was like a little spoken word performance, but
So
of the
cute.
recipes. And then some of the kids asked me to like read some head notes. And so I started reading. I read like 2 head notes. And they were like, read more. And so this event just evolved into me reading like 15 head notes. And I was like, this is so funny. Like, can you imagine like an adult cookbook event that's just like spoken word head notes?
There's like a cookbook editor listening to this podcast salivating right now at the idea that anyone is spending that much time with the head notes.
Yeah.
I mean, they just love being read to, probably is one element. That's something that kids are maybe more familiar with than adults in some ways. And also, these kids must be really interested in food. Do you feel like being in touch with such a younger generation of people that are interested in food made you think differently about anything?
It definitely was a hopeful reminder that today's kids, and granted, this is like biased based off of who decided to come to my events, but they're growing up with much more diverse palettes than I think even I did, and that many kids I knew growing up did. I think the sense of what normal, simple, everyday food is certainly changing among kids ages 8 to 11. I also think that there seems to be this like narrative that like, oh, my kid, like kids don't want new to them. They don't want foods that feel too different. But I found that like the kids that I had 30 kids recipe testing for my book, and then also all the kids at these events, they were surprisingly open to just like having a bite of a thing, just trying it. And especially when they had a hand in making it, it made them more invested and it made them want to try it. And so I am not a parent, but it was very interesting to me to see, oh, like these kids are way more curious, I think, than we give them credit for.
Yeah, I think the part of making something gives you a vested interest in trying it. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. How did you navigate getting feedback from 30 kid recipe testers?
Oh my God. It was humbling. So I did the same thing I did with Indianish, which is that I sent them their recipes and then I sent them a Google Doc and was like, fill out a Google form for each recipe, or have an adult do it. And yeah, these kids all knew how to use Google Forms. They're really savvy, these 8-year-olds. And so they filled out Google Forms that had, things like were there steps that were hard to follow? Would you make this again? How easy or hard did you find this recipe? What did it taste like? And kids don't mince words. You know how when you get adult feedback, they'll be like, I liked this. Maybe you could improve this. And
Compliment sandwich.
Yeah. They compliment sandwich. Kids don't do that. I remember there was one noodle recipe that I ended up taking it out because 3 kids just hated it. And one person just said it was yucky.
Oh my God.
That was the only
kids
feedback.
Don't like noodles, you're in a bad spot.
Exactly.
Also.
They just didn't like the broth. They were not rocking with the broth. And so I cut it. It was a lot of really brutal feedback at times. Yeah, would not eat again. Didn't like too rich. And a lot of the feedback too. We had some budding food writers. Someone ate a pepper and cheese quesadilla and was like, the pepper danced in my mouth.
That's so funny. Yeah, besides the quesadilla, were there any kind of standout recipes in the book, either on the kid perspective or on your own end?
The one that was by far the most popular among all the recipe testers, every single kid who made this, I feel that it changed them, was the profiteroles. My husband, Seth, developed a lot of the dessert recipes, and that one, he'd originally written it so that kids make their own choux pastry, and I was like, I'm sorry, Seth, but...
That's Seth's dream for his own future child, yeah.
Yeah, these kids are not making their own choux pastry. And so we were having dinner with our friend Sola. I was telling Sola, I was like, I don't know what, you can't really, store-bought choux pastry is, not really as much of a thing. And she was like, what about Hawaiian rolls? And I was like, that's a good idea. And so we went home, we bought a sleeve of Hawaiian rolls, we toasted them in butter and then put ice cream, and then we made a quick ganache, and it was so good. And the photo was amazing too. When we had the photo shoot, it was the best ice cream sandwich you've ever had. And yeah, the kids just lost their minds over that recipe.
So good. And I love the King's Hawaiian roll. I bought them at the grocery store last week, and I had so many ambitions of things to make with them. And I think I just ended up, maybe I dipped them in something. I feel like I was just eating them by the handful.
They're so good. They're so delicious.
So I feel like you've done a couple different styles of books. Indianish is a book that you wrote with your mom as well. This book has recipes from all kinds of different developers. It's being written kind of for kids, but also for adults. Are you interested in other kinds of formats for future books or other kinds of projects?
I would like to do a non-cookbook book next. A book. I feel like I've written all of the cookbooks that I've really wanted to write, which I feel so lucky to be able to say that. Who gets to write all the cookbooks they want to write by their early 30s? But I really do, I feel like I put it all out on the dance floor, and I feel really good about the books I have put out. I hope that they stand this test of time. And I'd love to do more essay-based writing, a book that allows me to exercise my reporting chops, but also tell personal stories. One thing at Indianish that surprised me was I kind of treated the intro and the head notes as sort of these afterthoughts. And Indianish to me was a description of the recipes. But then when the book came out, I realized that Indianish was also a description of my identity at large, and all of the stories reflected that, and people connected with those stories as much as they did the recipes. And so it's made me wonder what else I can do with that doesn't involve recipes.
As a reader of your writing, I would love a book as well. And I feel like you have an interesting perspective on the food industry, the food media industry specifically as well. We met at Bon Appetit, you were at Lucky Peach way before that. Now you're at The Times. I feel like the food media industry is in an interesting inflection point right now. I feel like a couple years after the pandemic, people are cooking in different ways or dining out in different ways. Do you feel like your perspective coming from different newsrooms gives you a certain POV on where you think the industry is at or where you hope food media might be going?
I mean, yeah, I've only been in the industry for 11 years, and I feel like I know people who've been in the industry for much longer than that. But it's wild to have been in an industry long enough to have really seen it go through like distinct eras. Like I'm working on the story right now, how vegetarian friendly is dining out in New York really? Basically about how, 10 years ago when I was working at like Momofuku, there were always these jokes about how like, we're not catering to vegetarians. Like it was like a thing to take a stance against vegetarians. Like you want Brussels sprouts, I'm going to put bacon in them.
The bacon era for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like the bacon and cupcakes. And now we're in this era where like everyone's into quote unquote plant-based eating and they all want to eat vegetables and use aquafaba to make whipped cream and all of that stuff. And I'm doing an experiment with like, what does it actually mean to eat vegetarian at like some of the top restaurants in New York? And it's very interesting to have like lived through the like fuck you vegetarians era and now be in a like, I'm not eating meat right now for whatever reason. It's also like I've lived through like the pre and post Me Too era. I mean, I feel like we're still living in it. I was part of a restaurant group where like the line between like work and play was very blurred. Like I experienced that. And then I've like spoken on the record about like two former bosses of mine who were toxic in different ways. There's been an entire racial reckoning in our industry dealing with, being told Indian food is too niche, then being like, oh no, we want your Indian recipes now, and almost feeling like you're being tokenized. And now I feel like we're in the era of like, we tried diversity and we're just going to go back to business as usual, not just in media, but I feel like across the board. And like trying to stay hopeful and like continue to fight to like normalize diversity within like every aspect of food that I touch. But it's like surprisingly still, it's still a fight sometimes.
I see that as well. I think it's interesting that I think like because of social media in part, like the expectation that readers or like consumers have is that they want to feel more like transparent with these brands sometimes, whether that's a publication or a D2C food brand or a restaurant group. But then like not everyone actually feels that way, or only like some people that are part of those consumers actually want that transparency. And then maybe they're not actually getting the transparency that they think that they're getting in the first place. Like I think that people are having very public kind of wrestlings with like how much do you identify as like a part of a community when really you're like a consumer or a reader. Like I think the way that I see those kind of debates playing out makes me very interested to see how these people, especially with positions of power at brands and publications and restaurant groups, respond to that or don't.
I agree.
We're going to solve it right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so to close today, Priya, I want to play a little rapid fire taste check game with you. So I'll give you a question. You tell me the first answer that pops into your head.
All right. Okay.
Okay, your favorite New York City occasion restaurant?
Sema.
Your favorite casual New York City restaurant?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say, can I allowed to say an ice cream place?
Yeah, sure.
Malai ice cream. That's where I go for casual wind down time.
Counts as a lunch also maybe. There's like calcium in there.
Yeah, totally. It's a meal.
Your favorite bakery in the city?
Either Radio or Rafts.
Your favorite item of summer produce?
Tomatoes.
Favorite season for cooking?
Summer.
Go-to bodega snack?
Seaweed snacks.
Like a specific flavor or?
Just the regular salted seaweed snacks.
Yeah. Your go-to bagel order?
Cream cheese and tomato on an everything bagel.
Toasted or untoasted?
Toasted.
Okay.
Definitely toasted.
A now closed restaurant anywhere that you wish you could bring back from the dead?
Tabla.
Where is that?
It's in New York. It opened 25 years ago by the chef Floyd Cardoz and closed. It was in Flatiron, I think. It was like 2 ahead of its time, but I wish I could eat there.
Mm-hmm. Your favorite cookbook?
Ooh. A cookbook that I'm really loving right now is a cookbook by this Pakistani author, Sumaya Osmani. It's called Andaz. I made her preserved lemon rice, and it was really good.
Whoa. The most underrated piece of kitchen equipment?
Like the crappy $5 paring knife.
Something that you will never make from scratch?
Jalebi.
Favorite restaurant in Texas?
Favorite restaurant in Texas?
Huge question.
Ugh, huge question. Just like a restaurant that just continually hits is probably Nixta Taqueria in Austin. I love it so much.
Okay, finally, a fictional food scene like from a book or a movie that you wish you could eat in real life.
Ooh, I've actually written about this one. It is, I think we've talked about this. It is the scene in The Princess Diaries starring Anne Hathaway where she's at the state dinner and they give her like a palate cleanser between meals and it just looks like it's like the most delicious looking green ice cream or sorbet. And she takes a huge bite of it and then like yelps because she doesn't realize it was frozen. But just the way that it scoops, it looks so creamy. There's not an ice crystal in sight. I dream about what flavor that might be. In my mind, it's like some kind of herby green apple sorbet that's super creamy. Ugh.
I think I thought it was green grape maybe when I first watched it.
That also sounds really good.
But I was a child, so I feel like maybe I need to revisit.
Yeah,
as
I was
an
like
adult.
9.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Priya.
Yeah, thank you.
Eliza, we're back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Matt. How are you?
I'm really great. I think it's time to talk about 3 things.
Yeah, you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, why not? So I'm thinking that this is my summer fall of fiction. I'm on a tear, Eliza. This is the second book I read in a series of 2 books for the year. I'm on 2 novels.
We're very proud of you.
I joke because I see on Instagram all the time, like 36, 39, 55. Like everyone's doing that shit. And that's cool. I mean, we work at Penguin Random House. Obviously, I love when people are serial readers and buy books. I just have been, I mentioned on the previous 3 things, I was really into nonfiction. I was writing my own book, so I didn't really give the fiction its time. And what pleasure and joy I take in reading fiction. I know you're a big head yourself.
Yeah, so what are you reading?
So I got to read Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser-Akner. We know Taffy from Fleshman is in Trouble, from the FX series, and her amazing debut novel. But I think she's really raised the bar with this new novel, and I just cannot recommend it enough. Themes about generational trauma, Hollywood, unions in higher education. There's a kidnapping at the center of it. And then it's all around the Jewish American experience out east on Long Island. And what I like about Taffy's writing are a couple things. First, she reports her novels in a way that's unique that only a journalist could do. The fact that she goes into these vignettes that are just very detailed, and she builds universe that feel real because they're actually real and authentic. I think Rachel Khong does a similar thing too because she comes from a journalism background. So that's one. And second, she's funny. Mm-hmm. And she's just so funny it jumps off the page. Dialogue, world building that's just ridiculous situations. There's a scene in a hotel room in this book that is unforgettable. So I'm working on having Taffy on the show.
I would love that.
We've been talking for a while, so hope to have her on in the next couple months. What's your first thing?
My first thing is that I had a really cute picnic lunch that I would recommend to anyone to do while the weather is still nice. I went to Asakana in the East Village, which is a great Japanese fish market that used to be in Bushwick, and they hopped over. And you can pre-order, which I recommend because they sell out sashimi, sushi. They also do like donburi rice bowls. And you just walk over to Tompkins Square Park and have a picnic. We just got a bunch of sashimi and some of the sides, like pickled daikon and seaweed, and then actually like brought our own sushi rice from home because I was looking at ordering the rice and I said, we have rice at home. But they do sell sushi rice. So you could just, buy it all there. But the quality of fish was just really high. They do omakase style. So it's whatever they have in that day that's fresh. And it's a really fun thing to do.
I love Tompkins Square. I used to live off of it for, early 2000s, and it's an amazing place for a picnic. Was there any live music being played?
No, I was hoping that like Crust Punk Festival that they do in the summer was going to happen when
So
we were
good.
there. Kind of like the ultimate soundtrack to omakase sushi in the park, but no, we just hung out.
I love that Crust Punk Festival was a real staple. The Charlie Bird Festival was a real staple, and really, I have to ask you about your sushi rice recipe. Is there mirin in it? Is there rice vinegar in it? What are you doing?
It was just seasoned rice vinegar, sugar, salt,
Yeah.
a little bit of MSG. And yeah, I mean, you totally could just buy the sushi rice there. I think this is me becoming my mom. I was like, we have rice at home. We're not going to buy it.
I mean, it's way better when you do it homemade, and I love that you've articulated that sushi rice is actually a recipe. I think maybe some of our listeners, when they go to have sushi, you think it's just like boiled rice, but in fact, it's not.
Because sometimes people have kombu like in the rice, I
Yeah.
think for seasoning. But Osakana, highly recommend. It was great. What's your next thing?
My next thing is I was in Los Angeles recently, and I really, really, really had the pleasure of dining at Cato, which is a place that it formerly was in a strip mall, and it has moved to the Row downtown. It is a restaurant of John Yao, and he cooks, I'd call it modernist Taiwanese cuisine. The cool part about the menu and dining at the bar, and I'll get to the bar program, is that you can do a more pared down tasting that really channels the SGV, the San Gabriel Valley, where John grew up. And so John was cooking just the most creative dishes that channeled these small restaurants in SGV. There was dishes with langoustines, there's dishes with like lots of seafood in it, and really I could go on about John's cooking, but I want to focus mainly on the cocktails by Austin Henley. Austin is incredible. Have you been to Cato? Heard of Cato?
No, it's been on my list for a long time, but I haven't made it.
It's so worth it, and I have to say, Austin has become a friend. And if you're interested in not just incredible cocktails but NA drinks, Austin is really at the forefront of NA mixology, we'll call it. He worked at Momofuku's Major Domo in LA. He worked at Maison Premier and Booker and Dax in New York, trained under Dave Arnold. And, Austin, what he's doing with his NA menu is cool. He's serving some just straight dealcoholized wines, which I think I joked on this show that I've never had a good dealcoholized wine. Well, that has changed. I had an incredible sparkling rosé from Germany, and he says the Germans are at the forefront of NA technology for dealcoholizing wine. That was cool. I had a really great Japanese NA, Centauri, that was kind of hard to find. I love that. But really, Austin is creating drinks that channel both classic like bitter Negronis, but also his own inventive, like an Arnold Palmer spin. Austin is thinking about drinking as a higher art form, which I think is corny in some ways, but I buy in fully that mixology and drinks making is a type of craft and artisanship, and he's one of our finest mixologists.
Well, it's a glowing review. I'll have to go the next time I'm in LA.
Absolutely. I love Austin, and shout out. Thanks for the hospitality. What is your next thing?
Well, speaking of drinks, I recently had a very important watch party for the Sex and the City movie with my friends because a lot of my friends have been watching the show for the first time. So to culminate, we watched the movie. And so, of course, I had to make frozen Cosmos.
I love this. I love this. I love this. So you had never seen the original? This is the original.
I had.
Okay.
But there were people among us who had never seen the show, who had never seen the original movie. And then after watching all of the show, we, of course, got a bunch of snacks. So, of course, I had to make frozen Cosmos. And Food and Wine has the recipe from Toby Caccini, who famously created the Cosmo when he was the bartender at the Odeon. He now is the bar director at Long Island Bar, where they do a really good frozen Cosmo. So I had high hopes in this recipe, and it was really so delicious, and everybody at the watch party could not stop drinking them, started talking about how we wanted Cosmos to be our drink. I think the frozen is just a really fun version for it.
Yeah.
It basically is a couple kinds of citrus juice, vodka, cranberry juice, and then like Cointreau or Grand Marnier, some kind of like orange liqueur. We had some tamarind vodka that we used, which was nice just for a little bit of like extra funk. But I highly recommend this frozen Cosmo recipe.
Okay, start from the beginning. Tell me, what was the rewatch like of the original Sex and the City? How did you find that?
awesome, super boisterous. Everyone was screaming at the TV.
Yeah.
There's a lot of divided opinions. I mean, I think no one really likes Mr. Big, actually, in my
No.
friend group at least. But we all dressed up a little bit. It was very fun. And we're going to do the second movie, which is quite bad, in the fall. So we'll need
Extremely
more
bad.
Frozens. Yeah.
The first one's bad. The second one is extremely bad.
It's going to be fun. It's not really about the movie.
No.
You know?
And so do you watch And Just Like That, the TV series?
I do, against maybe my better judgment, watch And Just Like That as well. It's obviously not the same, but also I watch it. So clearly I'm finding interest in it.
Shout out to the new season. Sam Murby is now an executive producer. I look forward to watching, I think it's season 3. So that's coming soon.
Yeah. I love Sam Irby and I
Yeah.
love A Frozen Cosmo. What's your final thing?
My final thing is I have 2, actually. The first is that it's briefly congratulations to our friends at Yes Please. They've roasted the 300th coffee.
Wow.
And Wow was right. They're doing weekly roasts, these amazing blends and single origins, and they're just absolutely killing it. And I get it every couple weeks. And Tony Kanicki and Sumi Ali are the 2 folks behind it. And I love their coffees. So 300, that's 300 weeks of operating this business. Shouts to them. And the second is I got to go to Montague Diner last night.
Oh, what did you think?
Oh my gosh, Eliza, you're so spot on with that rec. I thought it was so great. And I used to live near there for many years. And I have to say the diner scene in like Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, Brooklyn Heights never really did it for me. I know there's like a couple beloved places, but I never really felt my spot. I loved it. I ordered the hippie sandwich, which was toasted bread with avocado hummus, a really terrific mayonnaise and sprouts, mozzarella sticks off the chain.
So good.
Great like NA lineup, great chilled wines. And they had Petey's pies. So we had a chest Petey's pies and some ice cream. I thought the vibe inside, the great service, just really nice people. Wasn't that crowded. And it wasn't that expensive. I mean, everything about it, I was like, this is a cool Brooklyn spot.
I love that you went. You have to go back for the tuna melt.
I thought about it. I'm not a tuna melt guy.
Okay, I'll go back and have the tuna melt.
Yeah. What is your last one?
My last one, I don't think I've talked about this before, but I'm really obsessed with this. So tell me if I have. The chasu bolo bao at Melewa in Chinatown.
Oh,
is
yeah.
like maybe my last meal on earth. There's something about it that I'm just so obsessed with. The shtick is basically that it's a bolo bao pineapple bun with that almost like concha, like sweet, crackly topping, absolutely stuffed with chasu pork inside. So it has this kind of savory, sweet, crunchy, kind of tender, fatty dichotomy going on. They're like $2.50 each probably. There's always a long line of people waiting to buy from the terminal outside. I would say do not wait in that line. Just go directly inside and be brave and just wait in line and get up to the front and place your order there and have cash ready. And like it's much quicker. You don't actually have to deal with waiting for that outside terminal. I think that's tourists that just see the line so they get
the TikTok
in it.
followers, yeah.
I literally was going to dinner at Thai Diner and we had 40 minutes to kill.
Stop.
And so we walked to Mele
Stop
Wok.
it. You did a little appetizer
Yeah, I
game.
mean, we just split one and then kept one for later. But it was like, well, I'm 10 minutes away and it's still open and maybe they'll have some left. And the whole experience of waiting, like people were buying like 10 buns at a time. It was going so fast. Perfect timing. A fresh tray comes out of the oven, still warm. It was like getting a glazed Krispy Kreme donut when it's still warm.
So good.
So that's my final thing.
I love that. The char siu bao, when it's right, it's right. It's like one of the greatest foods.
And like the bolo char siu bao, I've never had that before anywhere else. I would love to try it in more places if it's available. I think it really is doing something right.
Well, thanks for sharing your 3 things, Eliza.
Yeah, you too. This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.